The champagne cork popped in my kitchen at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. I wasn't supposed to be home. I wasn't supposed to hear my mother's voice echoing through the hallway, saying the words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. Finally, that manipulative little witch got exactly what she deserved.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The divorce papers had been finalized exactly 72 hours earlier. 72 hours of what I thought was my family rallying around me, offering support, bringing casseroles, and telling me everything would be okay. My marriage to Derek had crumbled after 8 years. Not because of infidelity or abuse, but because we'd simply grown into completely different people who could no longer stand being in the same room together. It was mutual, it was civil, and it was absolutely devastating. I thought I was handling it well. I'd taken a week off from my job at the marketing firm, spent my days reorganizing the apartment that was now solely mine, and tried to figure out what my life looked like as a 31-year-old divorced woman. My family had been my anchor through it all. Mom brought soup every other day. My sister Bethany had taken me shopping for new bedding because she said I needed to reclaim my space. Even my usually distant father had called twice to check on me. That Tuesday afternoon, I'd left to meet with my lawyer, Patricia Kellerman, to discuss the final property settlements. The meeting had been postponed last minute. Patricia's assistant called saying there was an emergency with another client, so I'd driven home earlier than expected. My silver Honda pulled into the driveway at 2:45 p.m., and I could see through the living room window that there were several cars parked along the street. Mom's burgundy SUV, Bethany's white sedan, my Aunt Carol's distinctive yellow convertible, and even my cousin Marcus's motorcycle. At first, I felt a warm surge of gratitude. They'd probably organized some kind of support gathering, maybe ordered pizza and were planning to spend the afternoon helping me sort through the last of Derek's belongings that he'd never picked up. I grabbed my purse and house keys, already mentally preparing to graciously accept their kindness, even though I really just wanted to be alone. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual when the family was over. I stepped inside quietly, not wanting to startle anyone, and that's when I heard it. Laughter. Not the gentle, supportive laughter of people trying to cheer up a grieving family member. This was different. This was celebratory. I froze in the entryway, my keys still dangling from my fingers. "I never liked him anyway," Aunt Carol was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was 3 glasses of wine deep. But I really never liked her attitude about the whole thing. Derek was too good for her. I mean, let's be honest here. She's been impossible to deal with for years. Remember how she acted at my wedding, making everything about her problems with Derek even then? My breath caught in my throat. My sister was talking about my wedding behavior from 3 years ago, when I'd admittedly been stressed because Derek and I were going through a rough patch, but I thought I'd handled it well. I'd kept my issues to myself, participated in all the wedding activities, and even gave a heartfelt maid of honor speech. The way she controlled him, my mother's voice joined in, and this was the voice that made my knees weak. Poor Derek couldn't make a single decision without checking with Princess Sarah first. No wonder he looked miserable all the time. Princess Sarah. She'd called me that mockingly when I was a teenager and had opinions about things, but I hadn't heard it in years. I thought she'd stopped saying it to my face.
I pressed myself against the wall, hidden by the corner that separated the entryway from the living room. My heart was pounding so loud I was afraid they might hear it. "And now she's going to get half of everything," Marcus chimed in. "Derek worked his ass off building that consulting business, and she gets to walk away with half because she was smart enough to marry him before he made it big." "That's not how it works," my father's voice corrected, though not in my defense. "She's not getting half the business. Derek was smart about protecting that. But she's getting the house they bought together and a decent settlement, more than she contributed, if you ask me." The house. My house. The one I'd picked out. The one where I'd planted the garden in the backyard and painted every room by hand. The one Derek had agreed I should keep because he was moving in with his business partner anyway and didn't want the emotional baggage of our shared space. They were talking about it like I was some kind of gold digger who'd manipulated my way into a payout. Well, at least now family gatherings won't be so awkward, Bethany continued. We can actually have fun again without walking on eggshells around her mood swings. Mood swings. I thought back to the last several family gatherings, trying to remember being moody or difficult. There was my birthday dinner 6 months ago where I'd been quiet because Derek and I had just had a big fight about his work schedule. There was Christmas where I'd left early because I had a migraine. There was the 4th of July barbecue where I'd spent most of the time helping in the kitchen because I was trying to stay busy and not think about how Derek was flirting with my cousin's friend. I realized with growing horror that my family had been interpreting my attempts to cope with my failing marriage as me being difficult and attention-seeking. Remember when she made that big scene about Derek working late? Aunt Carol added, going on and on about how he never spent time with her anymore. I wanted to tell her that maybe if she was more interesting to be around, he wouldn't need to stay at the office. There it was. The champagne cork popped, and I heard them all cheer. "To Derek's freedom," my mother announced, and I could picture her raising her glass in the living room that I decorated, in the house that I'd made into a home. "To Derek's freedom," they chorused back. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, listening to them dissect my marriage, my personality, and my future with the casual cruelty of people who thought they were completely safe from being overheard. They talked about Derek like he was a victim who'd finally escaped from prison. They talked about me like I was the warden. "You know what the worst part was?" Bethany was saying. She actually thought she was the victim in all this, like Derek was the problem. I saw her Facebook posts before she took them down. Sometimes people grow apart. Wishing Derek all the best. So mature and dignified on the surface, but we all know she was probably screaming at him behind closed doors. I hadn't screamed at Derek behind closed doors. I'd barely raised my voice during our entire relationship. Our fights had been quiet, sad affairs, full of long silences and disappointed sighs. But apparently, my family had constructed an entire narrative about who I was in my marriage, and it bore no resemblance to reality. "I ran into Derek at the grocery store yesterday," my father was saying. "He looked better than I'd seen him in years. Said he was already dating someone new. Good for him." Derek was dating someone new. That stung, not because I wanted him back, but because I'd spent the last week wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, if I'd thrown away something that could have been fixed. Apparently, he'd moved on before the ink was dry on our divorce decree. "Who's he dating?" Marcus asked, and I found myself leaning closer to the wall, desperate to hear the answer, though knowing it would hurt. "That redhead from his office, Jennifer, I think, the one who does their marketing. She seems sweet, much more easygoing than Sarah ever was." Jennifer Chen. I knew exactly who she was. Derek had mentioned her frequently over the past year, always in the context of work projects, always with a little too much enthusiasm. I'd asked him once if there was something going on, and he'd looked at me like I was crazy and paranoid. "Jenny's just a colleague, Sarah. Not everything is about you." Apparently, everything had been about Jenny. "Well, I hope he invites us to the wedding," Aunt Carol laughed. "I'd love to dance at a celebration for once, instead of sitting through another one of Sarah's dramatic productions." My dramatic productions? I tried to think of what she could be referring to. My wedding had been simple, elegant, and went off without a hitch. My birthday parties were usually just dinner with family. I hadn't had any dramatic productions that I could remember, unless she was counting the time I cried at my grandmother's funeral, which seemed like an appropriate response to grief. "Should we be worried about her finding out we were here?" Marcus asked, and for a moment I thought I'd been discovered. She's at her lawyer's office until at least 5, my mother replied confidently. Patricia Kellerman called me this morning to confirm the appointment time. We have plenty of time to celebrate and clean up before she gets back. Patricia had called my mother. My lawyer had called my mother to discuss my appointment schedule? The woman I was paying to represent my interests in my divorce had been communicating with my family behind my back? That's when the pieces started clicking together in a way that made my stomach drop toward the floor. Patricia Kellerman had been recommended to me by my mother 6 months ago when Derek and I first started talking about separation. She's the best family lawyer in the state, Mom had insisted. She handled the Hendersons' divorce last year, got Margaret everything she asked for. You'll be in good hands. I'd trusted that recommendation completely. Patricia had seemed professional, competent, and sympathetic to my situation. She'd guided me through the paperwork, explained my options, and negotiated the settlement terms with Derek's lawyer. I'd felt grateful to have her in my corner. But Patricia had called my mother this morning, not me, my mother, to discuss my appointment time. Why would my lawyer need my mother to know when I was meeting with her? You know, Patricia said the funniest thing when she called, my mother continued, as if reading my thoughts. She said Sarah still thinks she's getting the retirement accounts Derek built up before they were married. Apparently, she has no idea that the prenup she signed covers those. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Prenup? What prenup? Derek and I had never signed a prenup. We'd talked about it briefly when we got engaged, but we'd both agreed it felt unromantic and unnecessary. We were young, neither of us had significant assets, and we were planning to build a life together. The conversation had lasted maybe 10 minutes before we dismissed the idea entirely. But my family was talking about a prenup like it was a well-established fact, and my lawyer apparently knew about it too. She's going to be so surprised when she finds out, Bethany giggled. Patricia said she's been operating under the assumption that everything accumulated during the marriage gets split 50-50. She has no idea that Derek protected most of his assets before they were even married. Good thing Derek's father insisted on that prenup, my father added approvingly. I tried to tell Sarah she should get her own lawyer to review it before signing, but she said she trusted Derek completely. Sometimes trust makes you stupid. I felt like I was falling through space. A prenup that I had no memory of signing? A prenup that my father apparently knew about and had advised me to review with an independent lawyer? A prenup that was going to significantly limit my settlement from a marriage that had lasted 8 years? How could I have forgotten signing a prenup? How could I have no memory of what should have been a significant legal conversation with Derek before our wedding? The best part, Aunt Carol was saying, is that she thinks she's so smart hiring Patricia. She has no idea that Derek's been paying Patricia's retainer from the beginning. The room started spinning. Derek had been paying my lawyer's fees. Derek had been paying the woman who was supposed to be representing my interests in our divorce. And my family had known about it this entire time? I gripped the wall to steady myself, trying to process what I was hearing. My lawyer was being paid by my soon-to-be ex-husband? My family knew about legal documents that I apparently had no memory of signing? They were celebrating my divorce like it was a victory for everyone except me. And they thought I deserved all of it. I just hope she learned something from this, my mother was saying. Maybe losing Derek will teach her that she can't go through life expecting everyone to cater to her needs. Sometimes you have to face consequences for your actions. What actions? What had I done that warranted this level of betrayal from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally? I tried to think of some terrible thing I'd done to deserve having my own family celebrate my pain, but I came up empty. I'd been a good daughter. I'd called my parents every week, remembered birthdays, and helped with family events. I'd been a good wife, supporting Derek's career even when it meant sacrificing opportunities for my own advancement. I'd been a good sister, listening to Bethany's problems and offering advice and support whenever she needed it. But apparently, being good hadn't been enough. Somehow, I'd become the villain in my own family's story, and they were all relieved to see me get what they thought I deserved. The sound of footsteps moving toward the kitchen made me realize I needed to leave before they discovered me. I backed toward the front door as quietly as possible, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed to get out of there and figure out what to do with what I just learned. As I reached for the door handle, I heard my mother's voice one more time. The only thing I regret is that it took Derek 8 years to finally see through her act. But better late than never, right? I stepped outside and closed the door behind me with the softest click I could manage, then walked to my car on legs that felt like they were made of water. I sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, staring at my house that might not actually be my house, depending on what was in this mysterious prenup, and trying to understand how my entire life had become a lie. My family hated me and had been pretending otherwise for years. My lawyer was being paid by my ex-husband. There was apparently a prenup that I'd signed but couldn't remember. And Derek had moved on to someone new before our divorce was even final. I started the car and drove away from the celebration of my misery with no idea where I was going or what I was going to do next. But I knew one thing for certain. I was done being the person everyone expected me to be. It was time to find out who I actually was underneath all their projections and assumptions. And I was going to start by figuring out exactly what Patricia Kellerman had been doing with my case. I drove to Patricia's law office without calling ahead. The Kellerman and Associates building sat on the corner of 5th and Madison, a sleek glass structure that had always impressed me with its apparent success and professionalism. Now it just looked intimidating, like a fortress where my enemies had been plotting against me. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, looked up as I walked in. "Ms. Morrison, you're early for tomorrow's appointment." Tomorrow's appointment? I didn't have an appointment scheduled for tomorrow. "I need to speak with Patricia immediately," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's urgent." "I'm afraid she's in court until 4:30, but I can—" "Then I'll wait." I settled into one of the leather chairs in the waiting area and pulled out my phone. For the next hour, I did something I should have done months ago. I researched Patricia Kellerman. Not just her credentials and win rate, which is all I'd bothered with when my mother first recommended her, but her client list, her connections, her history. What I found made my hands shake. Patricia Kellerman had represented Derek's business partner, Michael Torres, in his divorce 2 years earlier. She'd also handled legal work for Derek's consulting firm, including contract negotiations and intellectual property filings. Most damning of all, she'd been the lawyer who'd helped Derek's father structure his estate planning 3 years ago, work that would have given her intimate knowledge of the family's financial arrangements and priorities. Patricia Kellerman wasn't just conflicted in representing me. She was practically a family retainer for Derek's side. I was still processing this information when she walked through the lobby doors at 4:45, her briefcase in one hand and her phone pressed to her ear. She was a woman in her early 50s, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She'd always struck me as confident and competent. Now she looked like a predator in expensive clothing. "Sarah," she said, ending her call and approaching with what I now recognized as a completely fake smile. "What a pleasant surprise. Rebecca said you were waiting, but we don't have an appointment until tomorrow." "We need to talk now," I said, "in your office, privately." Something in my tone must have alerted her that this wasn't going to be a routine check-in. Her smile faltered slightly, but she nodded and gestured toward the elevator. Her office was on the 7th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city skyline. The walls were lined with law books and framed diplomas, and her desk was an imposing mahogany piece that she sat behind like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. "What can I do for you, Sarah?" she asked, folding her hands on her desk. "You can start by explaining why you called my mother this morning to discuss my appointment schedule." The color drained from her face so quickly that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she began, but I cut her off. There's been no misunderstanding. I heard my family celebrating my divorce this afternoon. They mentioned that you'd called my mother to confirm my appointment time. They also mentioned several interesting details about my case that I apparently wasn't aware of. Patricia reached for her water glass and took a long sip, clearly buying time to formulate a response. Sarah, I think you may have misheard. Did you or did not call my mother this morning? She set down the glass and looked directly at me. Yes, I called your mother, but not to discuss your case details. She's listed as your emergency contact, and I wanted to confirm that you'd be able to make today's appointment given some scheduling changes. My emergency contact? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my contacts. My emergency contact has always been Derek, and after the separation, I changed it to my friend Lisa Chen. I never listed my mother as my emergency contact with your office. Our records show. Show me. She hesitated, then turned to her computer and clicked through several screens. Her hesitation told me everything I needed to know, but I waited while she pretended to search for documentation that I was increasingly certain didn't exist. I'll need to have Rebecca pull the file, she said finally. But Sarah, I'm not sure why you're so upset about this. Your mother has been very supportive throughout this process, and she's only wanted what's best for you. What's best for me, I repeated slowly. According to my family, what's best for me is losing most of my assets in this divorce because of a prenup that I apparently signed but can't remember. Can you explain that? Now she looked genuinely rattled. Sarah, we've discussed the prenuptial agreement multiple times. You signed it 6 weeks before your wedding, after I advised you to have independent counsel review it. You chose to proceed without that review. I need to see this prenup. Of course. She turned back to her computer, but her movements were jerky and uncertain. I'll have Rebecca make you a copy. I want to see it now, the original. Patricia stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating something behind her eyes. Finally, she stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of her office. She pulled out a thick folder and returned to her desk, flipping through pages until she found what she was looking for. She handed me a document that was clearly a prenuptial agreement. My signature was at the bottom, along with Derek's, and it was notarized and dated 6 weeks before our wedding, exactly as she'd said. But as I read through the terms, none of it felt familiar. The language was dense and legal, but the basic structure was clear. Derek's business interests, retirement accounts, and several other assets were considered separate property that would not be subject to division in the event of divorce. My contributions to the household and marriage were acknowledged but valued significantly lower than his financial contributions. It was not a document I would have agreed to sign. It was not a conversation I remembered having. This doesn't make sense, I said, still staring at the signature that looked like mine but felt like a forgery. I remember discussing a prenup with Derek and deciding against it. I remember that conversation clearly. Memory can be unreliable during stressful periods, Patricia said gently. Planning a wedding is overwhelming, and it's not unusual for brides to forget some of the legal and financial details. But I hadn't forgotten. I was absolutely certain that Derek and I had decided not to do a prenup. I could remember the exact conversation, sitting on our couch on a Sunday morning, agreeing that we wanted to build everything together as equal partners. Who was the notary? I asked, looking at the signature at the bottom of the document. Robert Martinez. He's a notary who works with our office on document authentication. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of every page of the prenup, including the notary seal and signatures. Patricia watched me with growing discomfort. Sarah, I'm not sure what you think you've discovered, but I think I've discovered that my lawyer has been working for my husband instead of for me, I said, standing up from my chair. I think I've discovered that my family has been conspiring to make sure I get as little as possible from this divorce. And I think I've discovered that this prenup is either fraudulent or was signed under circumstances that I can't remember. Those are very serious accusations, Patricia said, her voice taking on a warning tone. I would be careful about making statements like that without evidence. Oh, I'm going to find evidence, I assured her, starting with a conversation with Robert Martinez about whether he actually notarized my signature on this document. I headed toward the door, but Patricia's voice stopped me. Sarah, before you do anything rash, you should know that challenging this prenup would be very expensive and very difficult. These documents are presumed valid unless you can prove fraud or coercion, and that's a high legal bar to meet. You could spend tens of thousands of dollars on legal fees and end up with nothing to show for it. I turned back to face her. Are you advising me as my lawyer not to pursue this? I'm advising you as your lawyer to be realistic about your options and the likely outcomes. Then as my lawyer, you should know that I'm firing you effective immediately. I'll have a new representation contact your office tomorrow about transferring my case files. Her composure finally cracked completely. Sarah, that would be a mistake. We're so close to finalizing everything, and bringing in a new lawyer at this stage would delay the process by months. Derek is eager to complete the settlement, and if you drag this out, he might decide to fight for even more favorable terms. Derek was eager to complete the settlement. Of course he was. He'd probably been getting updates on my case from Patricia all along, knowing exactly what I was thinking and planning while I was kept in the dark about the true nature of my situation. Let him try, I said, opening the door. I'm done being the only person in this divorce who doesn't know what's actually happening. I walked out of her office, past Rebecca's desk, and into the elevator, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking action instead of just reacting to circumstances I didn't understand. But as the elevator descended toward the lobby, I realized that firing Patricia was just the beginning. I needed a new lawyer, but more than that, I needed to understand how I'd ended up in this situation. I needed to know whether that prenup was legitimate, and if it was, I needed to understand why I had no memory of signing it. Most importantly, I needed to figure out who I could trust, because apparently it wasn't my family, my lawyer, or even my own memories. I spent that evening in my apartment, surrounded by boxes of documents that I'd pulled from every drawer, filing cabinet, and storage bin I owned. Wedding planning folders, bank statements, insurance papers, tax returns, anything that might contain evidence of the prenup or explain the gaps in my memory. What I found was more disturbing than what I didn't find. There were no drafts of a prenup in my wedding planning materials, no emails discussing prenuptial agreements, no notes from meetings with lawyers. But there were other things that didn't make sense. Bank statements showing payments to Kellerman and Associates dating back 10 months, well before I'd supposedly hired Patricia. Insurance documents that had been updated 6 months ago to remove Derek as a beneficiary, something I definitely would have remembered doing, but apparently had done anyway. Most unsettling was a receipt from a local medical clinic dated 8 weeks before my wedding for a consultation I had no memory of scheduling or attending. The invoice was vague, just consultation and evaluation, but it was paid for by my health insurance and signed with my name. I called the clinic first thing the next morning. Riverside Medical Center, this is Amanda. How can I help you? I need information about an appointment I apparently had 8 weeks before my wedding 3 years ago. I'm trying to understand what the consultation was for. I'll need to verify your identity first. Can you provide your date of birth and social security number? After going through the verification process, Amanda put me on hold for several minutes. When she returned, her voice sounded carefully neutral. Miss Morrison, I show that you had a consultation with Dr. Rebecca Walsh on March 15, 2022. The notes indicate it was regarding memory concerns and sleep issues. Dr. Walsh prescribed a short-term sleep aid and recommended follow-up if symptoms persisted. Memory concerns. I'd seen a doctor about memory concerns right around the time I supposedly signed a prenup that I couldn't remember signing. Can I speak with Dr. Walsh today? I'm sorry, but Dr. Walsh is no longer with our practice. She relocated to Oregon last year. I can have your records sent to another provider if you'd like. Yes, please send them to my current physician. I gave her Dr. Martinez's information, then hung up and immediately called his office. Dr. Martinez was able to see me that afternoon, and when I arrived, he already had my records from Riverside Medical Center pulled up on his computer. Sarah, these records are interesting, he said, adjusting his glasses as he read through the notes. According to Dr. Walsh's evaluation, you came in complaining of memory gaps, difficulty sleeping, and episodes of confusion. She noted that you seemed particularly concerned about forgetting important conversations and agreements. I don't remember any of that, I said, which felt absurd even as I said it. That's what's concerning. Dr. Walsh prescribed Ambient for your sleep issues, but she also noted that you might be experiencing side effects from another medication. Did you take anything else around that time? I shook my head, but then stopped. Actually, I'm not sure. If I was having memory problems then, I might not remember what medications I was taking. Dr. Martinez turned back to his computer and pulled up my current medical records. I don't see any prescriptions from that time period in your current file, but that doesn't mean much if you were seeing another doctor or if the records weren't transferred properly. He printed out Dr. Walsh's notes and handed them to me. Sarah, I want you to think carefully about the weeks before your wedding. Do you remember feeling confused or disoriented? Any unexplained mood changes or physical symptoms? I closed my eyes and tried to think back to that time period. My wedding planning had been stressful, but most brides felt stressed, right? I remembered being tired a lot, but I'd attributed that to the busy schedule of final preparations. I remembered Derek being particularly helpful during those weeks, taking care of details I felt too overwhelmed to handle. Derek had been helpful. Derek had been taking care of things for me because I'd been feeling overwhelmed and confused. Doctor, is it possible that someone could have been giving me medication without my knowledge? His expression grew serious. What makes you ask that? I told him about the prenup I didn't remember signing, the lawyer I didn't remember hiring, the family celebration I'd accidentally discovered. I told him about the gaps in my memory and the feeling that important decisions had been made without my full understanding or consent. Those are very serious allegations, Sarah. If someone was medicating you without your consent, that would be assault, and any legal documents you signed during that time period could potentially be challenged as having been signed under duress or while incapacitated. How would I prove something like that? It would be difficult after 3 years, but not impossible. We could run some tests to see if there are any lingering effects, and we could try to track down pharmacy records or other medical documentation from that time period. You'd also want to consult with a criminal attorney, not just a divorce lawyer. A criminal attorney. The possibility that what had happened to me wasn't just a civil matter was terrifying and empowering at the same time. Can we start with the medical tests? Absolutely. I'll order a comprehensive blood panel and some cognitive assessments. We'll also want to check for any signs of long-term effects from benzodiazepines or similar drugs that could cause memory impairment. I left Dr. Martinez's office with a stack of paperwork and a growing conviction that my entire marriage had been built on a foundation of lies and possibly criminal behavior. But I still needed legal representation for the divorce itself, and I needed someone I could trust completely. That afternoon, I called Lisa Chen, my emergency contact, and one of the few people who had never made me feel like I was crazy or dramatic. Sarah, how are you holding up? I need help, I said without preamble, and I need the name of a lawyer who isn't connected to Derek, my family, or anyone else in this mess. What kind of mess are we talking about? I spent the next hour explaining everything I'd discovered over the past 2 days. Lisa listened without interrupting, occasionally making small, shocked sounds, but mostly just absorbing the information. Holy shit, Sarah, this is insane. Do you really think Derek was drugging you? I think someone was. Derek's the obvious suspect, but it could have been anyone who had access to my food or drinks during that time period, including my family, apparently. Okay, first things first, you need Catherine Rodriguez. She's a family law attorney who specializes in cases involving fraud and coercion. She's expensive, but she's absolutely ruthless when it comes to protecting her clients. I'll text you her number. Second, you need to stay away from your family until you figure out how deep this goes. If they were involved in whatever happened before your wedding, they might try to interfere with your investigation. They're probably wondering why I haven't called them back after yesterday's celebration, I said bitterly. Let them wonder. Don't give them any information about what you're doing or what you've discovered. And Sarah, document everything. Every conversation, every discovery, every test result. You're going to need evidence if this goes where I think it might go. That evening, I called Catherine Rodriguez's office and was surprised when she answered the phone herself. Rodriguez Law, this is Kate. My name is Sarah Morrison, and I need to hire an attorney immediately. I think my divorce settlement has been fraudulent, and I may have been a victim of assault. How soon can you be in my office? I can be there in an hour. See you then. And Sarah, don't discuss this case with anyone else until we meet. Anyone. I hung up the phone and looked around my apartment, the apartment that might not legally be mine, filled with belongings that might not legally be mine. In a life that had apparently been constructed around lies I was only beginning to understand. But for the first time since I'd overheard that champagne cork pop, I felt like I had a plan. I was going to find out exactly what had been done to me, who had done it, and how to make sure they paid for every single day of deception they'd put me through. The scared, confused woman who'd been manipulated into signing away her rights was gone. What remained was someone much more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Catherine Rodriguez's office was nothing like Patricia Kellerman's gleaming corporate fortress. It occupied the second floor of a converted brownstone, with mismatched furniture, overflowing bookshelves, and a coffee maker that looked like it had been rescued from a garage sale. But the woman who greeted me at the door radiated the kind of confidence that came from winning battles other lawyers wouldn't even take on.
You look like someone who's been through hell, Kate said, gesturing me toward a chair across from her cluttered desk. Tell me everything, and don't leave out details that seem unimportant. In cases like this, the devil is always in the details. I spent the next 2 hours walking Kate through every discovery I'd made, every suspicion I'd developed, and every piece of evidence I'd collected. She took notes in a rapid shorthand, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just listening with the focused intensity of someone who'd heard similar stories before. Okay, she said when I finished. First, the good news. If we can prove you were incapacitated when you signed that prenup, it's void. Contracts signed under the influence of drugs administered without consent are legally meaningless. And the bad news? Proving it 3 years after the fact is going to be a nightmare. We need more than just your missing memories and a doctor's note about sleep medication. We need to establish a pattern of deception, preferably with witnesses or documentation. Kate leaned back in her chair and studied me. Sarah, I need you to think about this carefully. What you're describing isn't just a bad divorce. If Derek was drugging you to get you to sign legal documents, that's criminal assault and fraud. If your family was involved, that's conspiracy. If Patricia was knowingly representing both sides, that's ethics violations that could cost her license to practice law. You're saying I should pursue criminal charges? I'm saying you should be prepared for the possibility. These people didn't just lie to you or take advantage of you. They may have committed serious crimes. The question is, how far are you willing to go to hold them accountable? I thought about my family raising champagne glasses to celebrate my pain. I thought about Derek already dating someone new while I struggled to understand what had happened to my life. I thought about Patricia taking money from my husband while pretending to represent my interests. As far as it takes, I said. Kate smiled, and it wasn't a particularly nice smile. Good, because we're going to need that attitude. Now, here's what we're going to do. She pulled out a legal pad and started making a list. First, we file an emergency motion to halt the divorce proceedings until we can investigate the validity of the prenup. Second, we demand all of Patricia's case files and billing records through discovery. Third, we track down this notary, Robert Martinez, and find out exactly what he remembers about witnessing your signature. What if he doesn't remember? It's been 3 years. Trust me, notaries remember unusual circumstances. If you were acting strange or seemed impaired when you signed, he would have noticed. And if he can't provide details about the signing, that's suspicious in itself. Kate continued writing.
Fourth, we're going to need a private investigator to dig into Derek's finances and communications from the months before your wedding. If he was planning this, there might be evidence of it in his emails, texts, or financial records. Can we get access to that? Once we file fraud allegations, we can subpoena a lot of information. The key is building enough of a case to convince a judge that these extreme measures are justified. She set down her pen and looked at me seriously. Sarah, I need to warn you about something. Once we start this process, your life is going to become very public and very ugly. Derek and your family are going to fight back, probably by attacking your credibility and your mental health. They'll paint you as a vindictive ex-wife making false accusations. Are you prepared for that? I thought about how my family had already painted me like that for years anyway. At least now I'll know about it. All right then, let's destroy some lives. The next morning, Kate filed an emergency motion to stop the divorce proceedings, citing new evidence of fraud and coercion. By noon, my phone was buzzing with angry calls from my family that I didn't answer. By evening, Derek's lawyer had responded with a motion to dismiss our claims as frivolous and requested sanctions for filing baseless allegations. But Kate had been busy too. She'd already tracked down Robert Martinez, the notary, and had scheduled a meeting with him for the following day. He remembers you, she told me over the phone, and he has some very interesting things to say about the circumstances of that signing. We met Robert Martinez at a small cafe downtown. He was a man in his 60s with the careful demeanor of someone who'd spent decades dealing with legal documents and the people who signed them. I remember that day very clearly, he said, after we'd ordered coffee. It was unusual because the young lady, you, seemed very disoriented. You kept asking what you were signing, even after it had been explained multiple times. My heart started racing. What did I say exactly?
You asked if you were signing mortgage papers for a house. Then you asked if it was an insurance form. When I told you it was a prenuptial agreement, you seemed confused and asked what that meant. Your fiancé explained it to you several times, but you kept forgetting what he'd said. Kate leaned forward. Did you have any concerns about Miss Morrison's capacity to understand what she was signing? Robert shifted uncomfortably. To be honest, yes. She seemed like she might be under the influence of something. But Mr. Morrison assured me that she was just nervous about the wedding and had taken some anxiety medication prescribed by her doctor. Did you ask to see the prescription or speak with her doctor? No, Mr. Morrison was very convincing, and the young lady wasn't obviously intoxicated. She could write her name and respond to questions, even if she seemed confused about the content. Kate pulled out a legal pad. Robert, I need you to think carefully about this next question. Did anyone else seem concerned about Miss Morrison's condition that day? Actually, yes. There was an older woman there. I think it was the bride's mother. She kept saying things like, Sarah, you need to focus, and just sign the paper, dear. We talked about this. She seemed frustrated with the bride's confusion. My mother had been there. My mother had watched me struggle to understand what I was signing and had encouraged me to sign it anyway. Did my mother seem surprised by my condition? I asked. Robert thought for a moment. No, she didn't seem surprised at all. If anything, she seemed impatient, like this was taking longer than expected, but wasn't unexpected. Kate and I exchanged glances. If my mother hadn't been surprised by my disorientation, it suggested she'd known what to expect. Robert, would you be willing to provide a sworn statement about what you witnessed that day? If it helps get to the truth, yes. I've always felt uncomfortable about that signing. I should have insisted on postponing it until the bride was more coherent. After Robert left, Kate and I sat in the cafe planning our next moves. This is huge, she said. We have a notary who will testify that you seemed incapacitated and that your mother appeared to expect your condition. That's evidence of conspiracy. What about Derek's lawyer's motion to dismiss our case? Let them try. With Robert's testimony, we have enough to survive a motion to dismiss. More importantly, we now have grounds to demand Derek and your family's communications from the months before your wedding. My phone buzzed with another call from my mother. I showed Kate the screen. Should I answer it? Not yet. Let's see how desperate they get first.
Desperate people make mistakes, and we need them to make as many mistakes as possible. As we left the cafe, I felt a mixture of vindication and dread. I was finally getting answers about what had been done to me, but those answers were revealing a level of betrayal that was almost incomprehensible. My own mother had participated in a plan to drug me into signing away my rights. The question that haunted me as I drove home was simple. If they'd been willing to go that far before my wedding, what else had they done during my marriage that I didn't remember or understand? And more importantly, what were they willing to do now to keep their conspiracy from being exposed? The answer came sooner than I expected. 3 days after our meeting with Robert Martinez, I came home from work to find my apartment door standing slightly ajar. The deadbolt I always engaged was unlocked, and there were muddy footprints on the hardwood floor that definitely weren't mine. I called Kate immediately from my car, not daring to go inside. "Don't go in there," she said firmly. "Call the police and file a report, then call a locksmith. Someone wanted you to know they'd been inside." The police officer who responded was a tired-looking woman in her 40s who took my statement with professional disinterest, until I mentioned the ongoing legal case. "Ma'am, you said this break-in might be related to divorce proceedings." "My lawyer thinks my ex-husband and family may have committed fraud. We filed motions in court this week, and now someone's been in my apartment." Officer Martinez, a different Martinez than the notary, perked up noticeably. "Was anything stolen?" I had to go inside to check, which was when I discovered just how calculated this invasion had been. Nothing valuable was missing. My laptop, jewelry, and electronics were all exactly where I'd left them, but other things had been disturbed in ways that were clearly intentional. My filing cabinet had been opened, and the documents I'd been collecting about the case were scattered on the floor. The photos I'd taken of the prenup with my phone had been deleted, though fortunately Kate had copies. Most unsettling of all, someone had gone through my medicine cabinet and left it open, with my prescription bottles arranged in a neat line on the bathroom counter. They were looking for something specific, Officer Martinez concluded, and they wanted you to know they'd been here. This wasn't a random burglary. After she left, I called Kate again. "They're trying to intimidate you," she said, "which means we're on the right track. But Sarah, you can't stay there tonight. Do you have somewhere safe you can go?" I thought about my options. My family was obviously out. Derek knew where I lived. Most of my friends were mutual friends with Derek or had connections to my family. "I'll get a hotel room." "Good. Tomorrow, we're going to accelerate our timeline." I was planning to wait another week before serving subpoenas, but someone just forced our hand. The next morning, Kate called me at the hotel with news that made my blood run cold. "Sarah, we have a problem. I just got off the phone with Robert Martinez's daughter. He was in a car accident yesterday evening. Is he okay?" "He's alive, but he's in the ICU with a traumatic brain injury. The doctors don't know if he'll recover, and even if he does, there's a good chance he won't remember anything from the past few years." The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. "Kate, this wasn't an accident." "I know, but proving that is going to be almost impossible. The police report says he lost control of his vehicle on a curve he's driven thousands of times. No other cars involved, no witnesses." I felt sick. They tried to kill him because he was going to testify for us. Probably. But Sarah, this changes our strategy completely. Robert's testimony was going to be the cornerstone of our case. Without him, we need to find other evidence fast. Kate had been busy while I was dealing with the break-in. She'd hired a private investigator named James Walsh who specialized in financial fraud cases. James had already uncovered several interesting details about Derek's activities in the months before our wedding. "Your ex-husband made some unusual purchases in the weeks before you signed that prenup," James told us when we met at Kate's office that afternoon. "He bought a pharmacy reference book about drug interactions. He also purchased a set of small glass vials and a precision scale from a laboratory supply company." "That sounds like he was preparing to drug someone," I said. "It gets worse. I found credit card records showing he paid for a consultation with a private doctor who specializes in what he calls pharmaceutical solutions for difficult situations. This guy's license was revoked 2 years ago for prescribing controlled substances without proper medical justification. Kate leaned forward. Do we have a name? Dr. Marcus Webb. He was practicing under the table when Derek consulted with him. I tracked him down to a clinic in Mexico where he's currently working. Would he talk to us? For the right price, probably. But Sarah, you need to understand what we're dealing with here. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision to slip you something at a party. Derek spent weeks planning how to incapacitate you just enough to get you to sign that prenup without realizing what you were doing. The premeditation was staggering. Derek had researched drugs, consulted with a disgraced doctor, and purchased equipment to measure precise doses. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. It was a calculated assault. There's more, James continued. I found text messages between Derek and your sister Bethany from 2 months before your wedding. She was updating him on your emotional state and suggesting when might be the best time to present the financial documents. My sister had been reporting to Derek about my mental state so he could time his assault more effectively. What about my mother? She was definitely involved. I found email exchanges between her and Derek's father about ensuring the family assets are protected and managing Sarah's expectations about her financial future. So Derek's father had been part of the conspiracy too. This wasn't just my husband and my immediate family. It was an entire network of people who had decided that my consent wasn't necessary for decisions about my own life. Kate spread out printed copies of the communications James had uncovered. Sarah, this is actually good news. We have documentary evidence of premeditation and conspiracy. Even without Robert's testimony, we can build a strong case. But what about the criminal charges? That's where things get complicated. The statute of limitations for assault in this state is 3 years. You have about 2 months left before we can't pursue criminal charges. 2 months to build a case that could put Derek, my family, and possibly others in prison. There's something else, James said, pulling out another set of documents. Derek's been very busy since your divorce was filed. He's been transferring assets to offshore accounts and restructuring his business ownership. If we don't act fast, there won't be anything left for you to recover, even if we win. Kate started making notes rapidly. We need to file for an emergency asset freeze. James, how quickly can you get me a complete picture of Derek's current financial situation? Give me 48 hours. Sarah, I need you to think about something, Kate said. We're about to go to war with some very dangerous people. They've already tried to intimidate you and possibly attempted to kill a witness. Are you prepared for this to get worse before it gets better? I thought about Robert Martinez lying in a hospital bed with a brain injury because he'd been willing to tell the truth about what he'd witnessed. I thought about my family celebrating my pain while knowing they'd participated in crimes against me. I thought about Derek moving on with his life, taking everything we'd built together, while I struggled to understand what had been done to me. They made one mistake, I said finally. What's that? They let me find out what they did. If they'd just kept their mouths shut and let me quietly disappear into my new life, I never would have known. But they couldn't resist celebrating their victory. And now they're going to find out what happens when you underestimate someone you've spent years underestimating. Kate smiled that dangerous smile again. Then let's make them regret every single decision they've made since the day they decided you didn't matter. The war was about to begin, and this time I wouldn't be fighting it alone or unaware. This time, I'd be fighting it with the full knowledge of what had been done to me and the legal firepower to make sure everyone involved paid the price. The scared, confused woman they'd taken advantage of was gone forever. What remained was someone much more dangerous, a woman who knew exactly who her enemies were and exactly what they were capable of doing. The emergency asset freeze hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. By Wednesday evening, Kate and I were deep in preparation when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Sarah, it's Jennifer Chen, Derek's girlfriend, the woman he'd been dating before our divorce was even final. I almost hung up, but something in her voice stopped me. What do you want, Jennifer? I need to meet with you, tonight. There are things about Derek that you need to know, and I think I'm in danger. I looked at Kate, who was listening intently. She nodded and made a keep talking gesture. What kind of things? I can't say over the phone, but Sarah, I found some of your medical records in Derek's home office, along with videos of you that you definitely didn't know were being recorded. I think you need to see them. My blood turned to ice. What kind of videos? Meet me at the Riverside Diner on Oak Street in an hour. Come alone and bring your lawyer if you have one. I'll explain everything then. She hung up before I could respond. Kate was already grabbing her jacket. This could be a trap. Or it could be the break we need. She said she has my medical records and videos. If Derek was recording you without consent, that's another felony. But Sarah, if they've been planning to eliminate witnesses, Jennifer could be next. We arrived at the diner early and chose a booth with clear sightlines to all the entrances. Jennifer walked in exactly on time, looking nervous and constantly checking over her shoulder. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 26, with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of expensive skincare and regular salon visits. She slid into the booth across from us and immediately pulled out a manila envelope. "I'm going to cut right to the chase," she said. "Derek's been lying to both of us, and I think he's planning to get rid of me now that I know too much." "Start from the beginning," Kate said, pulling out her legal pad. "I started working at Derek's consulting firm about 18 months ago. He was still married to you then, Sarah, but he told me you two were separated and heading for divorce. He said you were difficult and demanding and that you'd been having psychological problems." I felt the familiar sting of hearing my character assassinated, but I kept quiet. "About 6 months ago, Derek started talking about wanting to be with me exclusively, but he said the divorce was complicated because you were fighting the prenup and making unreasonable demands. He painted you as someone who was trying to take advantage of him financially." Jennifer reached into the envelope and pulled out a stack of photographs. Then, last week, I was at his house helping him organize some files when I found these. The first photograph was of me, clearly taken without my knowledge. I was sitting at my kitchen table, and from the angle, it had been shot through my window. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 months ago, well after Derek had moved out. "He's been stalking me," I said, flipping through more photos. They showed me at the grocery store, at my office, getting coffee, all taken without my knowledge or consent. "There are more," Jennifer said, pulling out another stack. "These are from before your divorce was filed." These photos were different. They showed me in various fates of undress, clearly taken inside our shared home. But what was most disturbing was my appearance in them. In photo after photo, I looked disoriented, confused, sometimes barely conscious. "I look drugged in these," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That's what I thought too, but Derek told me you had drinking problems and were often intoxicated. He said he was documenting it for the divorce proceedings." Kate leaned forward. "Jennifer, did Derek ever give you anything to eat or drink that made you feel strange afterward?" Jennifer's face went pale. "Actually, yes. A few times over the past couple months, I felt incredibly tired or confused after having dinner at his place. I thought maybe I was working too hard or getting sick." "He's been drugging you too," I said, "probably as a test run for whatever he's planning next." Jennifer reached into the envelope again and pulled out a small stack of medical documents. "I found these in his filing cabinet. They're your blood test results from 3 years ago, but they're not from any doctor whose name is on your insurance records." I grabbed the papers and scanned them quickly. They showed elevated levels of benzodiazepines and other sedatives in my blood, but they were dated 2 weeks after my wedding. Derek had been testing my blood to monitor the drugs he was giving me. "There's more," Jennifer said. "I found a journal where he's been documenting everything. His experiments with different medications, your reactions to them, how long the effects lasted. Sarah, he's been treating you like a lab rat for years." Kate was writing furiously. "Do you still have access to these documents?" "That's the problem. Derek figured out that I'd seen them. Yesterday, he told me we needed to take a little vacation together to somewhere remote where we could reconnect without distractions. I think he's planning to get rid of me. Why are you helping me? I asked. You could have just disappeared. Jennifer looked down at her hands. Because I realized that everything Derek told me about you was a lie, and because I found something else that made me understand what kind of monster I've been dating. She reached into the envelope one last time and pulled out a printed email. This is an email Derek sent to someone called MT 3 weeks ago. I think MT might be Michael Torres, his business partner. Kate and I read the email together. MT. The Sarah situation is almost resolved. Once the divorce is final, we'll need to deal with the potential liability she represents. She's been asking too many questions lately, and I'm concerned she might start remembering things we need her to forget. The Jennifer solution is working well. She trusts me completely and has no idea what's coming. After we handle both problems permanently, the business restructuring can proceed as planned. Everything will be clean. D. The email was talking about handling both problems permanently. Derek was planning to kill both of us. Jennifer, you need to come with us right now, Kate said urgently. We're going directly to the police, and then you're going into protective custody. I can't. Derek thinks I'm at my sister's house tonight. If I don't come home, he'll know something's wrong. If you do go home, you might not survive the night, I said bluntly. Jennifer started crying. I don't know what to do. I'm terrified, but I also don't want to believe that someone I love could be planning to murder me. Kate pulled out her phone. I'm calling Detective Morrison at the county sheriff's office. She handles cases involving domestic violence and threats. We're filing charges tonight and we're getting both of you protection. While Kate made the call, I studied Jennifer's face. She was young and scared, and she'd been manipulated by Derek just like I had been. But she'd also made the choice to come forward when she could have just run away. Jennifer, thank you for doing this. I know it can't be easy. I keep thinking about all the times Derek told me stories about you being crazy or demanding. Now I realize he was probably describing the effects of the drugs he was giving you. I feel sick thinking about how I believed him. He's very convincing, I said. He convinced my entire family that I was the problem in our marriage. Kate finished her call and turned back to us. Detective Morrison is meeting us at the police station in 20 minutes. She's also sending a unit to Derek's house to conduct a welfare check and see if he's planning to leave town. We paid for our untouched coffee and headed to the police station. Detective Morrison turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened to our story with the focused attention of someone who'd seen similar cases before. Miss Chen, I need you to understand that if you go back to Mr. Morrison's house tonight, you're putting yourself in immediate danger, she said after we'd finished our account. Based on what you've shown us, there's probable cause to arrest him for multiple felonies. What if he runs? Jennifer asked. We're monitoring his house. If he tries to leave, we'll stop him. But I need you to stay somewhere safe tonight. Kate spoke up. Detective, what about the evidence Jennifer found? Can you get a search warrant for Derek's house? Already in progress. Judge Harrison is reviewing our affidavit now. We should have the warrant within the hour. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Sarah, we need to talk. There are things about the family situation that you don't understand. Meet me at the old warehouse district on Industrial Boulevard. Come alone. Mom. I showed the message to Detective Morrison. That's obviously a trap, she said immediately. No one needs to meet in a warehouse district at 11 p.m. for a legitimate conversation. They're getting desperate, Kate added. The asset freeze hearing is tomorrow morning, and they know their whole conspiracy is about to be exposed. Detective Morrison's radio crackled with an update from the unit watching Derek's house. Detective, suspect's vehicle is gone. House appears empty. Neighbors report seeing him leave about an hour ago with several suitcases. Put out a BLO alert, she ordered, and get that search warrant expedited. Jennifer grabbed my arm. Sarah, what if he's going after your family? Or what if your family is trying to warn you about something Derek's planning? Or what if they're all working together to lure me somewhere isolated, like they did with Robert Martinez? Detective Morrison looked at the text message again. Miss Morrison, I strongly advise against responding to this message. But if you're determined to find out what your mother wants, we can set up a controlled meeting with surveillance and backup. No, I said firmly. I'm done playing by their rules. I'm done being reactive and defensive. It's time to go on the offensive. Kate raised an eyebrow. What do you have in mind? I'm going to text my mother back and agree to meet her. But instead of showing up, we're going to have the police waiting there to see who appears and what they're planning. Detective Morrison nodded approvingly. That could work. We set up surveillance at the meeting location, see who shows up and what they're carrying. If it's a setup for violence, we catch them in the act. I typed out a response. Mom, I'll be there in an hour, but I need to know that you're coming alone and that this isn't some kind of ambush. The response came back within minutes. Just me, sweetheart. There are things about Derek and the family that you need to know before tomorrow's hearing, things that will change everything. They're definitely planning something for tomorrow, Kate said. The hearing is at 10 a.m. If they can eliminate you tonight, the whole case falls apart. Detective Morrison was already coordinating with her team. We'll have the warehouse district surrounded. Sarah, you're going to be nowhere near there, but we'll have officers positioned to observe and record whatever happens. As we finalized the surveillance plan, I realized that everything was coming to a head exactly as Derek and my family had planned. Tomorrow's hearing would determine the course of the rest of my life. Tonight would determine whether I'd live to see it. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the confused, isolated victim they thought they were dealing with. I had allies, evidence, and a plan. Most importantly, I finally understood that the people who'd claimed to love me had been my enemies all along. The question now was whether Derek and my family were prepared for the war they'd started with someone who finally knew how to fight back. At 11:47 p.m., Detective Morrison's voice crackled through the radio in the surveillance van where Kate and I were monitoring the warehouse district operation. We have multiple vehicles approaching the target location. Through the night vision cameras, we watched as 3 cars converged on the abandoned warehouse where I was supposed to meet my mother. My mother's burgundy SUV was the first to arrive, followed closely by Derek's silver BMW and a black sedan I didn't recognize. That's Derek's father's car, Jennifer said, pointing at the sedan. She'd insisted on staying with us, despite being in protective custody. Harold Morrison always drives black Lincolns. So Derek hadn't fled town after all. Instead, he'd coordinated with my family for what they clearly intended to be a final solution to their Sarah problem. Through the surveillance feed, we watched as 5 people got out of the vehicles: my mother, Derek, Derek's father Harold, my sister Bethany, and my cousin Marcus. They were all carrying something: flashlights, a large duffel bag, and what looked like construction equipment. Detective Morrison, are you seeing this? Kate spoke into her radio. Copy that. We're recording everything. Sarah, these people came prepared for serious violence. Marcus was unloading shovels from the back of his pickup truck. Bethany was carrying a container that looked suspiciously like the industrial bleach she used at her cleaning business. Derek was pulling on rubber gloves while his father opened the duffel bag and began distributing items to the others. They're not just planning to kill me, I said, my voice barely a whisper. They're planning to dispose of my body. My mother walked toward the warehouse entrance, checking her watch and looking around expectantly. Even from a distance, I could see the impatience in her body language. She was annoyed that I was late to my own murder. Derek pulled out his phone and appeared to be texting someone. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a message. Sarah, where are you? Mom's been waiting for 20 minutes. I showed the message to Detective Morrison. Should I respond? Not yet. Let's see what they do when they realize you're not coming. We didn't have to wait long. After another 10 minutes of pacing and checking their phones, the group huddled together for what was clearly an intense discussion. Derek kept gesturing angrily, while my mother appeared to be trying to calm him down. Then Harold Morrison, Derek's father, pulled out what was unmistakably a gun. All units, suspect are armed, Detective Morrison radioed immediately. Prepare to move in. But before the police could advance, something unexpected happened. A 4th car pulled into the warehouse district, a white sedan that I recognized as Patricia Kellerman's vehicle. What is she doing here? Kate asked. Patricia got out of her car and walked quickly toward the group.
Even from our distance vantage point, we could see that her arrival was not welcome. Derek pointed the gun in her direction, while my mother stepped between them. "Looks like there's trouble in conspiracy paradise," Detective Morrison observed. Through the directional microphones the police had positioned around the warehouse, we began to pick up fragments of their heated conversation. "Told you we needed to wait until after the hearing." Patricia's voice was high and panicked. "Past the point of waiting." Derek's voice was cold and controlled. "Should have handled this months ago." "Never agreed to murder." Patricia again, clearly terrified.
Too late to get squeamish now. That was my mother's voice, and the casual cruelty in it made my stomach turn. Marcus had moved away from the group and was walking the perimeter of the warehouse, clearly acting as a lookout. Bethany was arranging the tools they'd brought with methodical precision. Harold Morrison was checking his watch and scanning the area like a military commander coordinating an operation. These weren't desperate people making panicked decisions. This was a well-organized team executing a plan they'd probably been discussing for weeks. "Detective, we need to move now," Kate said urgently, "before they realize she's not coming and decide to scatter." Agreed. All units, move in. The next few minutes were chaotic. Police vehicles roared into the warehouse district from multiple directions, their spotlights turning night into day. Marcus spotted them first and shouted a warning, but it was too late. The group was surrounded before they could reach their vehicles. Derek's reaction was immediate and violent. Instead of surrendering, he grabbed Patricia and pressed the gun to her head, using her as a human shield while backing toward the warehouse entrance. "Stay back," he shouted at the advancing officers. "I'll kill her." "Derek, don't make this worse," Detective Morrison called out through a megaphone. "Let Miss Kellerman go and we can talk." "Talk?" Derek laughed, and the sound was completely unhinged. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. This goes so much deeper than just Sarah." My mother was sobbing now, her hands zip-tied behind her back as officers led her toward a patrol car. She kept looking around, as if she couldn't understand how their perfect plan had fallen apart. "Derek, please," Patricia begged. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I just needed the money." "You took the money," Derek spat. "That makes you complicit in everything. Sarah wasn't supposed to figure any of this out. You told me your handling of the case was foolproof." Through the chaos, I heard my sister Bethany screaming at the officers. "You don't understand. Sarah's been lying about everything. She's the manipulative one. We were protecting Derek." Even facing arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, my family was still convinced that I was the villain in this story. Harold Morrison was the only one who remained calm as he was arrested. He looked directly into one of the police cameras and said clearly, "I'll be out on bail within 24 hours. This is far from over." The standoff with Derek and Patricia lasted another 30 minutes. Negotiators tried to talk him down while SWAT teams positioned themselves around the warehouse. Finally, Patricia managed to elbow Derek in the ribs and break free. He spun around wildly, firing 2 shots into the air before the police tackled him to the ground. As the dust settled and the suspects were loaded into patrol cars, Detective Morrison walked over to our surveillance van. "Sarah, it's over. We got everything on tape. Derek, your mother, sister, cousin, and Derek's father are all being charged with conspiracy to commit murder, among other things. Patricia's probably going to cooperate in exchange for a lighter sentence." I felt numb. What happens now? Now we build the strongest case possible. With Jennifer's evidence, the surveillance footage from tonight, and the testimonies we're going to get from some very scared conspirators, Derek's going to prison for a very long time. Your family members are looking at serious sentences, too. Kate put her arm around my shoulders. "Sarah, you did it. You exposed them all." But I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollowed out and exhausted. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had been planning to murder me and dispose of my body like garbage. Even with all the evidence I'd uncovered, part of me had hoped there was some explanation that would make sense of their behavior without making them monsters. There wasn't. Over the following weeks, the full scope of the conspiracy became clear through plea negotiations and police investigations. Derek had been drugging me intermittently throughout our entire marriage, not just before the prenup signing. He'd been documenting his reactions and sharing the results with his father, who was using the information to develop what he called pharmaceutical compliance protocols for wealthy families dealing with difficult wives and daughters. My mother and sister had been paid consultants in this research, providing Derek with information about my schedule, emotional state, and daily routines that would help him administer drugs without detection. They genuinely believed that I was a problem that needed to be managed, rather than a person with rights and autonomy. Patricia Kellerman had been taking money from Derek's father for years, representing wives in divorce cases while secretly working to minimize their settlements. She handled at least 12 similar cases, always ensuring that the men retained most of their assets while the women walked away confused about why their legal representation had been so ineffective. The network was much larger than just my case. Derek's father had been running what amounted to a criminal enterprise designed to help wealthy men control and dispose of inconvenient women. Robert Martinez had been investigating similar cases when he'd had his accident, which the police now confirmed had been attempted murder. Derek was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison for conspiracy, assault, fraud, attempted murder, and a dozen other charges. My mother is 15 years old. Bethany got 12. Marcus got 8 years for his role as lookout and enforcer. Harold Morrison, as the mastermind, got life without parole. Patricia Kellerman was disbarred and sentenced to 10 years, though she only served 6 after cooperating extensively with federal investigators who uncovered similar operations in 3 other states. The prenuptial agreement was voided completely. I received not only half of Derek's assets, but also significant damages from the civil lawsuit Kate filed on my behalf. Derek's consulting business was liquidated to pay victims of his father's criminal enterprise. More importantly, I got my life back. It took months of therapy to fully understand the extent of the psychological manipulation I'd endured. For years, I'd questioned my own perceptions, my own memories, my own worth as a person. Derek and my family had systematically undermined my confidence and sense of reality, making me doubt everything about myself. But I wasn't broken. I'd been wounded, certainly, but I'd also proven to myself that I was strong enough to fight back when I understood what I was fighting against. A year after Derek's sentencing, I was sitting in a coffee shop with Jennifer, who had become an unlikely friend. She testified against Derek at trial, and her courage in coming forward had been instrumental in stopping him before he could hurt anyone else. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't overheard that celebration?" I asked her. "You would have figured it out eventually," she said confidently. "Maybe not as quickly, but Derek was getting sloppy. He was too arrogant to maintain his cover forever." "And what about you? Do you regret getting involved with him?" Jennifer considered this seriously. "I regret being naive enough to believe his lies about you, but I don't regret the experience entirely because it taught me to trust my instincts when something feels wrong. Derek was charming and convincing, but there were always moments when something felt off. I just ignored those feelings because I wanted to believe I'd found someone special. I understood that completely. I'd spent years ignoring my instincts because I'd been conditioned to doubt my own perceptions. My phone buzzed with a text from Kate. "Federal prosecutors want to interview you next week about similar cases in Nevada and Texas. Are you up for helping them?" I showed the message to Jennifer. "They want me to help with other cases. Are you going to do it?" I thought about other women who might be living the same nightmare I'd lived, questioning their own sanity while their husbands and families conspired against them. I thought about other victims who might be drugged and manipulated into signing away their rights and freedoms. "Yes," I said, typing back to Kate, "I'm ready to help." The woman who'd been celebrating my divorce that day with champagne would never understand how their celebration had been the beginning of their own downfall. They'd underestimated me so completely that they'd gotten careless, and their carelessness had exposed a criminal network that had been operating for years. I wasn't the same person who'd stood in that hallway listening to my family toast my misery. That woman had been isolated, confused, and afraid. The woman I'd become was connected, clear-eyed, and absolutely unafraid of the truth. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's becoming so much more than your enemies ever imagined you could be. And sometimes the people who think they know you best are the ones who know you least of all. Looking for more? We've got two amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.